If you are in immediate danger, call 000. For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800 737 732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1800 497 212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Support links are included in the show notes.
Welcome to the Pride and Respect podcast, where we discuss the difficult topic of family, domestic, sexual and intimate partner violence within LGBTIQA+ communities. Each episode, we bring you genuine stories of lived experience and share empowering insights and advice from sector specialists. I'm your host, Dr Jack Farrugia, a researcher in the Youth Mental Health team at the Kids Research Institute Australia. I bring both research expertise and previous lived experience as someone who is LGBTIQA+ and has experienced intimate partner violence. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are joined by Kai Noonan. Kai is the Director of Sexual, Domestic and Family Violence Prevention at LGBTIQA+ Health Australia. They lead national efforts to strengthen the sector to prevent and respond to violence affecting LGBTIQA+ communities. Kai has over 15 years of experience delivering and managing programs in sexual, domestic and family violence. We're also grateful to have Bree here as well. Bree is a member of the LGBTIQA+ community and is speaking to her experience with domestic and intimate partner violence. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Great. I'm keen to know a bit about what motivated you both to be involved in the Pride and Respect campaign. Kai, would you like to go first?
I agreed to be part of the campaign because I believe that it's important to keep this issue present in everybody's mind. That's the issue of domestic and family violence, as well as violence in LGBTIQA+ communities specifically, or even to introduce the idea that violence does happen in LGBTIQA+ communities to people that may have never thought about it before. So even though I desperately hate any kind of public speaking, I do believe that it's important to say yes to the opportunities when they arise so that I can be a part of that awareness raising movement.
Thanks, Kai. And I think that really captures sort of the aim of this first episode of this podcast series is to break the silence and to really raise awareness about the fact that people in our communities also do experience this kind of violence when it's not always recognised as that.
I'm sure I have a lot more to say on that.
And I look forward to hearing it. Bree, why were you motivated to be involved in this campaign?
I actually saw the email come through, the one that was sent out, recruiting people. And as I was reading it, I was like, yes, that's me, like all of that. And I really feel like I am in a place after my lived experience of domestic violence. It's been long enough that I'm completely fine to talk about it. And I think it's really important to have the lived experience people who are the experts in that being the ones to speak about it. Mm-hmm. And I just know that the more awareness that there is, the more that someone might see themselves there and recognise what they're in and maybe think like, if that person can do it, I can get out as well.
And I think it is really important to have these people who are brave and bold enough to speak about their experiences so that people can look to them as someone to hopefully give hope and at least maybe recognise what they're experiencing might be violence and then to hopefully be able to seek support from there. So yeah, thank you for coming today and being keen to share your story. And of course, thank you as well, Kai, for the same. I'm keen to hear a bit about your story in a moment, but I think I'd just like to sort of maybe start the conversation around, what actually is family, domestic, intimate partner, sexual violence, and if there was more access to available information to know what, violence looks like in our LGBTQI+ context. Kai, do you have any thoughts on that?
I often say that it never happens where someone goes on a first date and they reach across the table and they slap someone, right? Like, it doesn't happen. It's a process that happens sometimes slowly, sometimes quicker, where people who use abuse test boundaries. They push, they see what they can get away with.
Personally, for me, with little critiques, tiny little critiques about, my appearance or what I'm wearing, or, that I was weird for saying something, like things that sort of just push you down a little bit and a little bit that don't sit right, but you think, oh, they must have meant it that way, or, you know, the making excuses thing.
Is absolutely right. It's that dropping the comment, can I get away with it? You've put up a boundary, how far can I push this boundary? Somebody who pushes boundaries, somebody who drops little insults and things like that, they're testing the waters, and it's gonna push more and more and more. Red flags can look a little bit different for people in the relationship as opposed to people outside the relationship, but often people who use abuse are also testing those boundaries with other people. If I just say this one thing about my partner, will I get away with it? Are you gonna pull me up? Are you gonna put in a boundary, or are you gonna laugh along? And that's why I always say, you know, if you hear a bad joke, you've got to interrupt. You've got to say, that's not a joke. That's not funny, dude. Don't say that. You don't have to use the word dude. The other thing that I often say is there are always red flags. Often we dismiss them. Often they might be subtle. Often we blame ourselves for them. But there are little things like, look at the way they treat staff. Look at the way they treat people who are maybe considered less powerful than they are. Look at the way they talk about their exes. If they're not willing to take accountability for the end of past relationships, if they're not able to admit to any wrongdoing, if they always blame their boss or their colleagues for things happening to them at work and they're not taking responsibility and accountability, then this might be a red flag or a warning sign. But the other thing I want to say is, the thing about abusive relationships is it's about patterns of abuse, right? That's what we're looking for. And those, you know, the early warning signs, the pushing boundaries, but doing it repeatedly. And often we also look for increasing in behaviours. Is there an increase in the severity? Is there an increase in the frequency? Because that is another pattern that's likely to escalate.
So, yeah, when people think about this type of violence, what assumptions do we think come to mind?
Well, I would definitely say straight away that it is a cis hetero relationship where there's a violent man and a woman who's a victim. Like straight away, everything that you see everywhere from all the campaigns look like that.
Yeah.
And there is a good reason for that. I mean, statistically, that is the most common form of violence.
Yeah.
Statistically, the majority of the time, it is cisgender heterosexual men who perpetrate violence against their cisgender heterosexual female partners and possibly children as well. So that does make a lot of sense. Yeah. However, just because that's the most common makeup of this kind of violence, it doesn't mean that it's the only representation of violence that should be available, because violence does happen outside that context too, as we all know. We know that men can be victims of violence as well. We know that women can be abusive. We also know that adult children can abuse their elderly parents. We know that grandparents can abuse their grandchildren. Mothers can abuse their children. Siblings could be abusive. Straight cisgender men could be abusive towards trans and bisexual women as well. Because violence can and does happen in any community, in any type of family or intimate relationship, just because statistically it's a less common form of violence, it doesn't mean that those victims of violence aren't just as worthy of visibility or just as worthy of support and systems around them that are designed to protect them and keep them safe. And that's why I like to talk about, or I think it's really important to continually talk about those people that aren't, as Bree said, in the movies, on the campaigns, because they do get forgotten and they're just as worthy.
And I think that really raises an important point where even in, cisgendered and heterosexual situations, this type of violence is usually only perceived as being physical violence, and that, again, historically has been a key critical, thing that we've needed to address. But I think we are seeing this push to understand that, family, domestic, sexual, intimate partner violence is not just physical violence, it's verbal, it's emotional, it can be spiritual, it can be financial. That isn't just relevant to LGBTIQA plus people, it is, but it's also relevant to cisgendered and heterosexual people as well. So I think that it is really important that we do sort of break that sort of understanding, because it's not just important for our communities, it's important for everyone to be able to understand that sort of violence is, and then to recognise it and hopefully find the support that they need.
And in fact, Jack, not all abusive relationships involves physical violence, but all violent relationships involve some kind of coercion, threats, intimidation, because at the core of every abusive relationship is one person's power over another person. And to do that, it often involves that psychological, emotional abuse well before physical violence ever comes into it, if it comes into it at all.
And we also do know as well that there are many unique ways that LGBTQIA plus people experience this type of violence. Kai, I didn't prepare you for this, but would you like to share about some examples of what that might be?
There are ways that violence is unique in our communities, and that can include people being abused because of their gender or sexuality, or because they have a variation of sex characteristics. And that could look like threatening to post intimate images of a trans or gender diverse person online in order to humiliate them. It could be using someone's HIV or other sexual health status against them. It could be threatening to out them. The other thing, though, which is something that is relevant to everybody, is that often the fact that there are either less services available to help an LGBTIQA plus person, or a person may be less likely to seek help because they're from our community, perpetrator or someone who uses abuse can use that against somebody as well. So they can use that and say, well, you can't go to police because they're never going to believe you. Or they will use it against them in their family courts by threatening that the courts will take their children away because they're transgender. Yeah. So we know that people use someone's gender or sexuality against them, but they also use the system and the discrimination that exists within the system and the fear that many of us have of the system to continue to perpetuate that violence and to trap that person from seeking help. One of the things I really like to talk about, though, is not just the differences, but also the similarities, because my fear is, and I've been working in this space for 10 or 15 years, and I used to talk about the differences and I used to highlight the differences so that people were aware. And now, the more that I work in this space, I start to talk about the similarities more, because there was this resistance where it was too hard, it was too different, we're not trained. And what we found was that even really well-meaning domestic violence frontline services would say, oh, I don't know how to work with this community, so therefore I'm going to refer you to another service that might be an LGBTIQA service but isn't a domestic violence service. And I don't want our communities to think that our relationships are, like we can't seek help, we can't air out our dirty laundry. We have to protect ourselves and protect our communities, which we know that our communities do. So what I want to bring people back to is the similarities. All violence, regardless of the makeup of the relationship, is about one person's power over another. And if we look for the similarities, then we look for the services and the options and the resources that are available to everybody to intervene in that violence.
And, these conversations are exactly why this podcast and this campaign exists, right? Is we really want to raise awareness about these sort of tricky things, about violence in our communities that might not be as widely shared or understood, and, really highlighting, the unique ways that, people, LGBTQA plus people do experience violence. Bree, would you mind sharing a bit about your experience and your story?
Yeah, so I'm here as a guest because I do have the lived experience with domestic violence. So I could talk a little bit about my reflection now, being away from that for so long and looking back and sort of being like, okay, yeah, like now I can see it. I sort of met someone, and I guess people who might be perpetrators can kind of tell if you have like low confidence or low self-esteem, something like that, and that's usually like the perfect pair to start a relationship like that. So there were lots of little things throughout the relationship where I was like, I don't think that feels completely okay, but I kept being like, that's a once off, they didn't mean that, and that builds and builds and builds until you are, how many years down the track, and it's worse and worse, and you feel like there's no escape. And that's where I was. And then we were actually moved to a place really far away from my friends and family and stuff. So that's where the isolation and everything began. And I was actually really, really lucky enough that my friend from here was studying law at a uni over there. Yeah. And as I was there, she was studying domestic violence law. And I just thought, she showed me like the the wheel of abuse and everything. And then I saw that and I was like, like I'm seeing some things here, but she's the only person that I knew over there. I didn't know anybody else. And it was just like a really sort of, you're stuck here, you're alone, these things are happening to you, there's no way out. This is your life now and you can't escape because it'll be, you start to think you can't leave because it will be bad, there's no way out.
Bree, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you mind? You said that your friend showed you the cycle of violence wheel?
Yes.
Or the power and control wheel.
Mm-hmm.
Did they show you that because they suspected that you're in a violent relationship, or they saw signs of abuse, or was it kind of per chance they were just showing you what they were studying?
I think reflecting, it was because she could see what was happening. And she hadn't been around our relationship much, but just from what she had witnessed and seen, she was like, look at this. And gently sort of got me to look at a few different things.
Incredible.
Yeah, that is really incredible. As Kai said, they were able to sort of recognise that. I'm curious to know a bit more about the journey for when you yourself started recognising that what you're experiencing was domestic violence.
Yeah, I think there were like two parts of me. There was one part of me where I was just like, this is not right. This has got to be, this is not healthy, this is not okay, this doesn't feel like a normal relationship. And then there was the other part that was like, no, that couldn't happen, women don't usually abuse women. And it was like two clashing parts where they weren't working together yet.
The other thing I find interesting is you started off by saying that people who use abuse are really good at recognising, I think you said, insecurities in people.
Yeah.
The other thing that we know about people who are victim survivors of domestic and family violence is that they tend to be incredibly empathetic, forgiving people, and they tend to be very kind people who are self-sacrificing. So it's just, I just kind of wanted to reframe that for you, because yes, they might look for particular vulnerabilities, and that's why we see high rates, or that's one of the reasons we see high rates in many minority populations, including LGBTIQA plus people, because they may not have that support socially or informally. But I just wanted to reframe that for you as well, because all of those amazing qualities that I think are really valuable in a person is also what's often used against them. And I just heard bits of it then when you were speaking about forgiving them. Yes, you might have been kind of dismissing or justifying the violence. It might have been hard to admit to yourself, but it could have also been that empathetic part of you that may have felt compassion for whatever excuses that person was using for their violence, and who wanted to forgive and who wanted to be kind, and who doesn't automatically think of harmful things and that people are out to get you because of those kind of, I guess, more positive traits that we see in victim survivors of violence.
No, I love that. Thank you for the reframe. That's so nice.
And I think this is where talking about this is really helpful, even in the moment, where we can sort of learn a bit about, as we're reflecting on our experiences, maybe a different sort of way of looking at it, to sort of have that sort of framing that might make a bit more sense for what we went through.
Yeah, I like the idea of reframing the language as well.
I'm keen to know a bit about what the experience was like when you first started to try to seek support for your experience of domestic violence.
Yeah, so I guess it would kind of start with when I left the workplace that I was working for, which was not for very long because I just moved to that town. I somehow just fell into these amazing people. Like, things would just worked for me. I feel very lucky in the scheme of things. Weird saying that about domestic violence, but I do feel very lucky with the people that happened to just magically be there at the time. So one of my colleagues, her and her housemates had actually, and I didn't know this at the time, had planned in case I ever had to leave. So they had like a conversation with all the housemates, and they had a plan to get me a bed and set up a room in the house and everything.
Yeah, wow.
And then one time something happened in front of them, and they were like, nah, that's it. And they found they went and found a ute for me in the middle of the night, helped me grab all my stuff, collect things, talked me through everything, and then got me into this new house that no one knew the address or anything, so it felt really safe.
Yeah.
So that was just so amazing. I feel really, really grateful for them.
Yeah.
And then I did eventually I went and saw a GP because I was like, I need some time off work, and they gave me 3 days. That'll fix everything.
Right.
So they gave me 3 days off work, and I did use that to do the logistics stuff of finalising the leaving and everything. But to be honest, there wasn't, if I'm talking about like organisations and professional people and stuff, I did not feel any support. It felt like quite a struggle there was nothing that I had ever come across before where I thought, I'll just reach out to them or I'll just go to them. It was just like, oh, so I've left and I'm in this house and now what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like that you just had the most incredible supportive group around you to sort of help you through that, which is amazing. I'm really glad that you had that. And I think it is important as well that we do speak a bit about the fact that there are a lack of LGBTQA plus inclusive family domestic violence services nationwide.
I absolutely agree with you, Jack, that across the country there are services. There are issues with the services and there are gaps in the services for all priority populations, including LGBTIQA plus people. I will say, though, in the 15 years that I've been working in this space, I have seen incredible improvements. Those improvements are not necessarily shared, and there's a lot of discrepancies across the country as well. I will preface anything by saying that there are definitely services who do incredible, genuine work with our communities. There are other services who are on a genuine journey to improve their work with our communities, and sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. And then there are other services who, I guess, are further behind on that journey of inclusion. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and some of them are individual and some of them are systemic. So first of all, one of the biggest issues is that the sexual, domestic and family violence sector is so gendered. I kind of liken it to sport in the idea that, well, men go over here and play in this one field and women go over here and play in this other field. And if you don't fit neatly into those boxes, then you got no playing field for you. And the domestic violence sector is really similar as well. We have women's services, we have women's intervention services, we have women's refuges, and then we have men's behaviour change programs. And some of it comes down to a service is not allowed to, or it's not part of their contract to service anybody who sits outside of that remit. For others, they genuinely want to service people who don't fit into those kind of neat categories, but their programs or their accommodation services may not be safe or they may not be appropriate. I did a small piece of research in New South Wales a few years ago now, looking at the men's behaviour change sector, and I was just looking at, well, how many gay men go into programs and groups. And I think we found a little while ago, so I think it was like 3 or 4 gay men had gone to any of the programs in New South Wales over a 1-year period that had actually gone into behaviour change programs. And these services were patting themselves on the back for actually having gay men in these groups, in these programs, because traditionally speaking, these programs weren't designed for gay men. I investigated this a little bit further and I found out that not a single one of those men had gone past week 3 of a 12-week program, right? Presumably because it wasn't safe or the content wasn't relevant to them, because gay men or men who have relationships with bisexual and trans women are not a part of their program. They're not thinking about them. The program's not designed for them. You can't say, oh, we have a program and sure, just come on in and we'll hope for the best. You need to be centering LGBTIQ people within your programs and services in order for it to work for them as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, you just have individuals who may carry bias or may want to work with our communities, but may get it wrong. And if somebody thinks that a service or a professional is not inclusive of them, will not understand their experiences, then quite frankly, they're not going to go to that service. And if they go to that service, they're not going to stay in that service if that service is not built for them. And we know any minority anybody from a minority population, they know if they are a fish out of water. They know if somebody's fumbling around with pronouns. They know if somebody's looking them sideways or whispering behind their back. We know. We have a detector. We have a radar that's going off every time we enter a space to say, are we safe?
Yeah.
And victim survivors of violence also have that. Yeah. That's what trauma is.
Yeah.
Trauma is a response that happens when somebody loses control. And so they try to take some control back around their own safety. And so they're aware of that. And if your service isn't doing something actively to help ease that person's stress responses and make that person feel comfortable and make sure that person knows that that service is for them, then they're not going to stay and they're not going to get help. And statistically, we know they're going to go back to their violent relationship. Mm-hmm. And that's why, Bree, I think it's incredible that you had friends that intervened and intervened so well, because we know that the first people that somebody comes out to about violence or discloses violence to, if that response isn't compassionate and genuine and believes them, then they're going to go back to that abusive relationship and they're going to stay in danger. And that's why education and campaigns like this are so important, so that people feel empowered, ready, educated and aware enough to intervene appropriately to potentially save lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100% agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking while you were talking about that, like services to go to afterwards, and it made me think about, I went to get help afterwards with a psych, as I think everyone should do after they've left something like that. And it had sort of just come up that I was in a lesbian relationship. Like I was there to talk about my experiences in that relationship. And instead of just being normal about it, she started telling me, like listing all these lesbian clients that she'd had to be like, that's cool, I know lesbians. And I just thought, no, I'm probably not going to go back here. This is so uncomfortable. I feel like she's looking at me like I'm one of them and this interesting thing, rather than actually wanting to help. And that is true. I stopped going.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's where, it's important, as we're speaking to now, and as you were saying before, Kai, that we need to have organisations and specialist support services that are designed by LGBTQIA plus people, because we know what's right for us and what we sort of need when it comes to seeking support for this. But we also need to make sure that the general system and mainstream services and the GPs or the psychs in sort of regular clinics out there are also capable of supporting. And research does also show that LGBTQA plus people would prefer to go to inclusive mainstream services more so than specialist LGBTQ plus services. And so we need to improve the entire sector, not just sort of providing more specific services.
And we need to give people choice.
Yeah.
The problem with being a victim of violence is that your choice has been taken away from you. And the first thing that we can do when people seek help is give them choices, empower them to make those choices, not take them away from them and say, well, this is the only option to seek help, and whether it's appropriate for you or not.
Yeah. And I think that with as we're sort of talking about and what this campaign sort of will seek to achieve is to raise that awareness, right, and have more people who are part of the LGBTQIA plus community recognise that what they're experiencing might be this type of violence. But if we are getting people to sort of recognise that, then we also need to make sure that there are services available for when they do go and seek support from. And that isn't, again, just up to the specialist services. It is up to sort of the GPs and the psychs and other sort of primary care providers or similar providers to be able to provide that inclusive support.
And we also know that from research, the majority of LGBTIQA plus people will go to a private therapist, counsellor, psychologist first, probably because they already have that established relationship, or it's easier to find somebody who is inclusive as opposed to walking through a door of a service and getting any one of 30 staff. However, that comes at a cost. And also, if you're leaving an abusive relationship, chances are you already either have been experiencing financial abuse or, as it sounds like may have happened to Bree, you're the one that has to go and then find a new place to live. You're the one that has to go and change all of your bank accounts. You're the one that, potentially has to put the kids in a new school, and there's all of these associated costs with leaving violence. And then you're the one that then has to go and pay to heal from the psychological damage that somebody else has done to you, and they're not paying for it. So it's like this ongoing almost abuse, or this ongoing unfair treatment. And so we can't expect victim survivors to just have the cash to go and get that private support. Mm-hmm. So again, we need to give options. And those 24/7 phone services are free, but they're also available any day, any night, 365 days of the year. Yeah. And so it's just, again, about having that choice and meeting people where they're at and giving them the options that they need at that time, or that they can afford at that time.
Yeah.
And I also kind of think that when you're just coming out of these relationships, or for me anyway, I didn't quite realise how serious it was, or that it was serious enough
Absolutely.
to call, 1-800-RESPECT or anything like that. I was just like, no, that's not for me,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It can take years and decades to figure out what's happened in an abusive relationship, and to be able to use those terms. And usually you need not usually, but often you need a professional to help you to see that and to name that. And so you're absolutely right to go through a shitty experience, or to feel put down, afraid, and then to be like, I know what this is, I'm going to call a service, is incredibly rare. And I think that's one of the myths and assumptions that people have about violence as well.
Yeah. And Bree, I'm keen to know a bit about, how these assumptions about, gender and sexuality might have shaped people's responses to what you were going through.
Yeah, something that I remember facing was that there was an assumption that people really thought that there were gender roles within a same-sex relationship, and that was sort of pushed onto us from people looking in, like people, weird experiences, with car dealerships, parents, family, anything. They think that someone is going to be this more masculine man figure, and someone's going to be like the dainty feminine one. And that I found that really was sort of put towards me in my relationship. And I heard people say like, some people just like a little bit of control. And when that rings in my head, and that does ring in my head, I just think, well, if you're thinking that means that the perpetrator is already winning. Like, if people on the outside are thinking that, then you're not going to notice anything or think that there's an issue with it and say anything to the person that is experiencing the abuse.
When you sort of mix that sort of expectations for normalised, masculinity and violence, when there are really severe and serious or just intimate partner violence is being experienced, that's where it goes misunderstood, not recognised, and people around you may not always necessarily see it as being violence, and that will then impact the support you might receive from both your, social, friendship, family circles, and from support services as well.
It doesn't always make sense either. Like, when you actually lay it in black and white, it doesn't always make sense. So when a woman is violent, then, she's just emotional, or she's just got a period, or she's just hysterical, or she's just attention seeking. When a man's violent, it's like, boys will be boys, we can just dismiss it. And they've all got gendered tones, but at the end of the day, it's just dismissing violence. It's just, I think people, I don't know what it is, but I wonder if it's just people being too uncomfortable to face what the reality might be, or we're just, like, society is just dripping in these stereotypes and we're all trapped by them.
Yeah.
And I feel it myself, even on a personal note. Like, I find myself making excuses for people or justifying violence because it's just everywhere around us. Like, I had a friendship circle, and I'm really sorry to say this in front of you, Bree, and I'm going to admit it. I have a friendship circle of predominantly women and queer women, and we all started to suspect that there was an abusive relationship between a couple in the group. And everybody was making excuses. I even made excuses for them at times. And I work in this sector, and it wasn't until one of them got a black eye that everyone went, oh, now it's not okay. And I think your friends were really great, Bree, but I'm just like, even if you're aware and you're educated, it's these excuses. And now what I have to say to myself and what I say to other people is, well, if this was a man doing that to a woman, what would your response be? And it's such a shame that we have to fall back on that. But we are we are all a part of this society as well, and we need to challenge our own beliefs and our own assumptions and where we get these ideas from. I think we need to be really honest with ourselves that we do get it wrong, because that's when we can make it right.
Yes, yep. And I think coming back to one of the points you were making at the start, Kai, around this framing thing, is that we can sort of frame this around the similarities that, how violence looks in both cisgendered and heterosexual contexts and LGBTQA plus contexts. In many instances, I feel in heterosexual relationships, there might be this sort of, it is normalized if the man might be abusive to the woman. Oh, that's just how it's always been. It's, that's just accepting that that's what it is and that's it, because that's what it may look like and whatever. And I think that kind of perception can be had in LGBTIQA plus context as well, where you've just sort of accepted that violence is normalized, but it shouldn't be.
I was just going to say, violence loves invisibility. It thrives in invisibility. And as Bree spoke to us, that isolation is part of that. One of the best ways to combat violence is to make it visible, to shine a light on it, so that it can't be dismissed, so that it can't hide in the corners where no one's going to see it and no one's going to interrupt and intervene.
And I think as well, because of, as we're speaking about the context that we've all grown up in, where violence is incredibly normalized, just generally, and also in family and relationship sort of context, it's very understandable that we aren't always able to recognize it. And when we are only ever seeing, family, domestic, sexual, intimate partner violence through this cisgendered and heteronormative lens, then, how are we supposed to know what it looks like in LGBTQA plus context? And we have a lot of information available on the Pride and Respect website, and there will be links in the show notes for that as well. So please check that out.
And we need to combat all those myths. The majority of movies about lesbians, one of them is a serial killer or a vampire or somehow some sexualized, violent person. Every film depiction of trans women in particular, they're all helpless victims. Gay men are all, sexual predators, or, it's everywhere around us, and it is getting better. But we need to combat that, because those images and depictions of us and our communities feed into the way that we have relationships, without a doubt. And they feed into the way other people view us and the way we view ourselves.
Yeah. And I think part of breaking the silence is having these real conversations from both ends, right? We've got, I think, a current push in the media with depictions of gay relationships specifically, speaking about heated rivalry, where that's a huge cultural moment where everyone is watching this TV show, which actually, now that I say at the start, maybe wasn't the healthiest relationship, but sort of turned into this sort of depiction of a really happy, beautiful, gay love story by the end of it. So we can have those, but we also need to make sure that we are having the real conversations of where it's not always that as well, whilst also making sure that isn't the only depiction. So it's a very tricky fine line to walk, but I don't think any of us here are going to solve it in this moment, but we can try.
Something else that's just come to mind for me is I feel like, for me personally, a lot throughout any of my relationships, lesbian relation, being in a lesbian relationship, that they aren't seen as legitimate compared to other types of relationships. You hear the phrase, the right man will come along, or something like that. So if my relationship isn't being taken seriously, then the abuse isn't taken as seriously.
Yeah.
That's something I think about when I reflect on it. I'm like, that's probably why, part of the reason why it was so hard to get out and get help and be seen by others and taken seriously.
We've come a very long way, and that's really great. We have marriage equality, and in WA there has been some progress with better rights for trans and gender diverse people, but everything isn't fixed. We still, there's a long way to go to break stigma, have better systems in place, have better support services, particularly for family, domestic, sexual and intimate partner violence. Yeah.
And Jack, progress isn't linear either. It's this assumption that, progress is made, you have these rights and therefore everything's going to be okay. what we're seeing, you know, in the 80s and 90s, we saw what was known as the queer bashings, particularly around, you know, Sydney and Melbourne, where gay men were beaten up and murdered. And then in about 2023, so things may have quietened down for a while. There were definitely still bashings and there was definitely still violence. But since 2023, we're seeing a spike again with gay and bisexual men being targeted again with violent group attacks. So men targeting men through apps like Grindr, luring them to meet in person and then attacking them. So the other thing is, although we see progress and we see change, and we have to celebrate progress and we have to celebrate change, we also can't get complacent because, you know, we're seeing it around the world now. You can achieve certain rights, but they can be taken away from you.
Exactly.
You can make certain social advances, but they're not always going to stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, and this progress, you know, is really important, but it can be really tricky for all the reasons that we've, you know, been discussing. I'm curious to know from both of you, you know, if we don't shift how we understand and respond to LGBTIQA plus family, domestic, sexual, and intimate partner violence, you know, what are the broader consequences?
Yeah, I mean, I think the broader consequences go beyond the obvious. So the obvious is that LGBTIQA plus people who are victims of abuse won't get help and rates of violence in our community won't reduce, right? That's the obvious kind of broader consequence. But beyond that, I genuinely believe that if we don't shift our understanding of violence to meaningfully include violence in LGBTIQA plus communities, then we're not going to reduce violence for all Australians. If we include LGBTIQA plus people in the beginning, in the development of these programs and services, in the development of these campaigns, we can change them, right? We can challenge them. We can bring a different perspective because there's brilliant work being done in the domestic violence sector, but rates of sexual assault we know are going up. It's the only crime in Australia that is actually increasing.
Yeah.
And domestic violence reporting at least is increasing, whether or not the violence is increasing. So we're certainly not ending domestic violence in one generation. And I think we're not listening to the groups who have had to deal with this violence their whole lives. And we need to be centering the perspectives of Aboriginal communities. And we need to be centering the perspectives of people with disability and LGBTIQA plus people, because we've been an afterthought. We've been left out of those conversations. And quite frankly, it's not moving fast enough. Change is definitely happening, but not fast enough. So bring us in and learn from us. Yeah. And so I guess to answer your question, Jack, the broader consequences of not understanding responding to violence in our communities is that the whole community is worse off.
And, you know, just to sort of capture that a bit, Kai, it's the nothing by us without us, right? Is that if we really genuinely wanting to reduce the consequences of violence, you know, in LGBTQIA plus communities, we need to be the drivers of that change and to be listened to and be actively involved in addressing that.
But I'll just take that a step further, Jack. You said nothing for us without us. I'll say nothing for anybody without us, right? So it's not just for us that you include us. Include us when it's for everyone. Because if you can tackle violence in minority populations, you can tackle it for everyone.
Yeah. Bree, is there anything you'd like to add around sort of the consequences that might...
I think everything, Kai, that you said was amazing. It pretty much hits the nail on the head. I don't have too much more to say on that. Everything that you said sounds perfect. And I so agree with that. We are focusing on one sort of group of people at a time as if they're all separate and they don't include these other people. Like we know that there are queer Aboriginal people. We know that there are queer people with disability, except we're just focusing on queer people, and then everyone's segregated into their little groups. It would make so much sense for everyone to work together because it is something that's affecting everyone. Yeah. I think, that's such a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And we know the drivers of violence are the same, regardless of who it's perpetrated against.
Yeah.
We know that it's rigid notions of masculinity and power. We know that it's deep insecurities. We know that it's a lack of social connection. We know that it's a lack of purpose and meaning in someone's life. We know that it's people clinging to power. It's the same, whoever they're abusing. It's all the same. And we need to, again, bring it back to those similarities because we're addressing it for everybody.
Yeah. We're sort of speaking a bit about this already, but I'm curious from either of you, you know, Is there anything else that needs to change so that LGBTIQA plus people experiencing this violence are seen, heard and supported?
I think what's happening that I am seeing now is that it's starting from a young age. Like, people are being taught from primary school about healthy relationships. I never got any of that, and that's part of when I look back, I'm like, that's why I didn't recognise a whole bunch of stuff. I had no idea. And I know that there's a lot of that being taught now to all genders. It's not just like the girls are being taught, oh, this is that can happen to you, this is what to look out for. It's taught to everyone all at the same time, and I think that's great. And then also from my experiences that I was talking before, like with the psychologist and other professionals, if they could have some sort of training, like updated training about LGBTIQA plus people, so that they don't assume things, or they can be more inclusive, that would make people want to reach out faster and maybe escape quicker. That's my perspective and thoughts on it.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And Kai?
I think it just takes a commitment from everyone, every single person, anyone listening to this podcast. Don't just leave it up to the police and the justice system or to service providers, or say it's a government issue. I think it's about every single person making a commitment to end all forms of violence for all people. We can't say that we're against one form of violence and then excuse it or justify it in another situation. So we can't say men's violence against women is bad, but violence against trans women is excusable or justifiable in any way. We can't say that when a woman abuses another woman, that it's just not as bad, or it's a lesser form of violence and it doesn't need to be treated in the same way. Just as we can't say that violence in the Middle East is bad, but violence in Aboriginal communities in Australia is not as bad or not my problem. Like, all violence is wrong. We have to take a stand against all violence, and we have to take responsibility, right? And I'm sorry to say this, and that's why I just hesitated, because I wasn't sure whether I should say this or not, but using abuse and hurting somebody is terrible, but being apathetic and doing nothing about it is almost as bad. If you say, I don't agree with violence, domestic violence is bad, but then you sit around doing nothing about it, saying, oh, well, maybe it's up to the government to change it. Well, I'm sorry, because every single person, anyone listening to this, someone who has experienced domestic violence. The statistics are really clear. If you yourself haven't been impacted by violence, somebody you know and love has been, and somebody you're going to meet soon in the rest of your life, you're going to come and you're going to come face to face with it again. And so I think you need to make a decision. What are you going to do about it? How are you going to get educated? How are you going to be aware? What are you going to say? Are you going to interrupt when somebody says a misogynistic joke? Are you going to excuse it when somebody just says things like, oh, my partner is, can't handle the money, so I handle all the money, or whatever comment people make, whatever little red flags you hear or orange or yellow flags you hear? When are you going to intervene? When are you going to say something? When are you going to be curious and ask more questions? When are you going to be brave? When are you going to see that it is your responsibility and it's not up to somebody else? Because this issue is far too great to leave it up to somebody else. It's up to all of us.
I think when you're in the domestic violence relationship and you're witnessing all that around you, all the excuses and everything, it makes you think, well, no one's noticing it. I'm not going to leave. No one else is seeing it. Maybe what I'm thinking is happening isn't really happening.
Absolutely. And your partner is already making you feel like you don't deserve help. They're already making you feel not good enough. They're already telling you no one's going to believe you. And then you're seeing this evidence around you.
And I think what you're both saying is incredibly powerful. And I think, Kai, for what you're saying, statistically, everyone listening to this podcast likely has or will meet someone who is or has experienced this type of violence. And that's where the resources that we have on the Pride and Respect website, a lot of information that people can access to learn more about what violence in our communities looks like, and some avenues to seek support from as well. So it is up to everyone, as you said, Kai and Bree, to learn about what this is and learn the best ways to support those around us as best as we can.
I was just going to say, there's also resources for friends and family as well. And there's also, you can call 1-800-RESPECT and ask for support for somebody that you care about as well. It's not just for people who've experienced violence themselves. And then after, if you are supporting someone, And you got to understand that supporting someone doesn't mean they're going to leave. They might still choose to be in that relationship. They may choose to deny the abuse, or they may choose to live with the abuse. And that's up to the choice of that person as well. You can't expect someone to leave, but that's going to be hard for you as well. And as a bystander, as a friend, family member, you deserve help as well, because violence impacts a whole community. It impacts a whole family.
Another thing that I'll add from my experience as well is that a lot of the people around me had a lot to say after the relationship, and a lot to, basically validate everything that they were seeing, but they hadn't said anything during. And I think the only person that it's protecting, if you don't say anything because it might feel a bit awkward or maybe you got it wrong, is that it's only protecting the perpetrator, and it's keeping your friend or family or member or whatever in that relationship. And I feel very strongly about, if you see something that doesn't seem right, say it. You can bring it up in the right way. You can figure out the right way, or to someone that's close with that person. I look back and I think, I wish someone had just done something or said something, and I might have noticed or been able to get out earlier, but there was just so much silent. And it's not like their fault, it's just how society at that time was. But I do think it is getting better, so I would definitely say something if you see something.
Oh, even something simple like, hey, I'm worried about you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. You don't have to put someone on the spot and expect answers, because if they're put on the spot, you probably won't get the answers you want. But just saying, hey, I'm worried about you. I'm here if you need me. And again, giving them a little bit of power back to make that decision, and just letting them know, I see you.
Yeah, just drops a little thought there. Just put something in your mind.
I'm curious to know from either of you, what gives us hope that change in this space is possible? Kai, would you like to go first?
I feel like I should go first so we can finish on Bree.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hopeful that change is possible, because change is already happening. The changes I have seen in this space in the last 10, 15 years are really actually quite breathtaking. The number of policy frameworks that include LGBTIQA plus people, the number of inclusive services or services who are on the path of inclusion, the increasing number of LGBTIQ plus specialist workers in LGBTIQA plus organisations doing this work is rapidly increasing. Things are changing. There's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of work ahead of us, and sometimes it can feel like we take 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. But change is happening. I can see it. It's all around us. Yeah. And so I have a lot of hope.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, I agree with that. I definitely have a lot of hope looking at from when I was trying to get help to now, and it is, breathtaking's a good word for it. I definitely do see so much more advertising, so much more openness. You see the little rainbow flags on places now, so you know that you can go there. There's all the different programs, all the different orgs that are in your face. You don't have to go searching the little faraway corners of the internet to try and find someone that's maybe going to help. It's there now, and they actually care. There's a big difference to now versus then, and I am hoping that it's just going to increase. It does feel like there is positive change, and it is going towards there.
And I think the fact that this Pride and Respect campaign exists, and we are all talking about this, on this podcast, is a sign that change is happening. And I think that's a perfect place to sort of close out. I want to thank you so much, Kai, for your incredible expertise, and you're incredibly well spoken. So thank you so much for coming onto the first episode of the Pride and Respect podcast to share all of that. And Bree, thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your stories and experiences. We're very grateful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us, Jack. I don't call myself an expert in the space, because I think there's so much to learn in every situation. Although there's a lot of commonalities, every relationship and every individual is so different. So I'm forever learning, and this conversation has taught me a lot. And thank you, Jack, for inviting me, but also thank you, Bree, for sharing your story, because hearing from people who are so willing to be open and share their stories is really powerful. And I mean, you and people like you are the reason why I do this work. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
If anything in this episode has raised concerns for you, support is available. If you're in immediate danger, call 000. For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual, Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1-800-497-212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Thanks for listening to another episode of Pride and Respect, a community partnership between Living Proud, Grey, Transfolk WA and WAC, generously funded by the Department of Communities. If this conversation was meaningful to you, please subscribe or share with others. To get more information, leave feedback or access the show notes, visit prideandrespect.org.au.